Hi BookTube! I'm here finally with my March wrap up. In March I threw out all my resolutions that I just started in February, and I read 15 books in total. 5 of those were comics, there were 3 physical books, 1 ebook, 2 audiobooks, and 4 books from the library, which were physical books, but I categorized them differently. So I'm just going to go through the comics quickly. There were Fruit Baskets, Collector's Editions Volume 1 and 2, Arab of the Future Volumes 1 and 2, and Batman Damned. So Fruit Baskets is just such a sweet and comforting read. And I thought it was more middle grade until I had actually made it halfway through Volume 2, and I was just like, whoa, this is definitely not middle grade. It's definitely adult. It's hilarious though. It's a really good read. I can't wait to read Volume 3. Then I read the first 2 volumes of Arab of the Future. It had me on edge. I don't say it was an enjoyable reading experience, but it was something I want to read more of. Like how horrible the children are and how horrible Riyadh's experience is as a young child. It's compelling reading, but it's not, fun, I guess you can say. In Batman Damned, the story was interesting. There's actually a reference to it in the new Batman movie, I thought. But there's nothing extraordinary about the story, and actually at times the writing was like a little disjointed. There was like too much going on, and it was just, it's not like a very straightforwardly told story. You have to kind of figure things out on your own. I did like, however, the different take on his parents and their relationship. You have to read it to find out. But I gotta be honest and say I didn't read this for the story. I read this for the art. It is just so detailed and realistic and grotesque and just amazing. I'm definitely gonna search out more by Lee Bermejo. I don't have his name in front of me, so I hope I got it right. So now on to the other books. I'm gonna be honest, I tried to rank them. I see a lot of booktubers doing that, ranking it from like the worst to the best. But I can really only think of the worst book and then like the top 3 books, and all the other ones are kind of like in the middle. So that's how I did it. So the worst book. The Portable Seminary, Chapter 1. It's written by multiple people. So it's not a whole book. Admittedly, it's just a chapter, but it is a big, thick book. And I'm just reading a chapter a month to get through it. So I'm reading this with the intention of understanding evangelical theology. Why would I do that? Because and if I just approach this book with that intention, then this book accomplished that. Even though I don't think that even evangelicals can understand their own theology, because a lot of it was just talking in circles. So personally, I call myself a progressive Christian. I believe things like universalism and LGBTQ plus affirming theology. I also believe that the Bible is largely metaphorical, but just because something isn't factual doesn't mean it isn't true. I'm not going to get into a whole discussion about my beliefs, but just know that I'm coming at this from like the opposite direction that they are writing for. So I already kind of knew that going into this it was going to be like butting heads with a lot of their arguments, but I want to understand it better to get to know my own faith better. So I'm just, while reading it, not trying to chuck the book across the room every time I do read it through. So an example of what they're trying to say is that they try to argue that Paul's letters are considered scripture because Paul himself said that they were scripture. I don't understand how that makes sense, because that means that I can write something, say that it's scripture, and therefore it is scripture. Like, that's not how it works. So like, I don't know if I'm getting more confused trying to follow the like fundamental mental gymnastics, but I'm trying. So I can go on for ages about fundamentalism. It's actually one of those topics where like if you were just told to give a lecture and you didn't have anything prepared, I could probably go on for like hours about fundamentalist Christians. Okay, and so these are the books in the middle that, generally 3 stars books, but I couldn't decide which of them is better than the other. The Secret History of the Mongol Queens by Jack Rutherford. And this book is about the role women played in the Mongol Empire. And the Mongol Empire is like massively huge and long, but we're starting with Genghis Khan and shortly after his death as well. And I love these type of micro-histories about something very specific. Like, it's not just about the Mongol Empire. It's not just about Genghis Khan. It's about the woman in Genghis Khan's family. And it made me, you know, and I like how he didn't just provide a timeline, but he told an engaging story. Sure, he probably embellished a few things because we don't know a lot. We have to infer from other texts about this era. But it made me both admire the Mongols in some eras and be disgusted by them in other eras. So he told a brief bit about like the general history, including the men, and then explained the role of the women in that context. So it wasn't just about the women. He assumed that you didn't know anything going in, so he explained it. And I like that because I really didn't know anything going into this. And it's interesting because a lot of times women were set as rulers over particular areas, while their husbands were basically conscripted into the Chinggis's army. So what would happen is that he'd conquer an area, and sometimes even just through marriage. And he'd say, okay, well, now this woman is the ruler, and the previous ruler is now going to come join the army, and he's going to be away from his people and fight for me. That's basically how he gained control of a lot of places. And it was interesting to get more context and a different perspective in conjunction with the other Mongol barbarian types of media I consumed this month as part of my made-up curriculum. So I watched the great courses and I read a fiction based on Mongols. And so let's talk about that book next. And that is The Hounds of Haradrim, Episode 1 by Jason Shannon. I don't know how many episodes there are, how many books there are. I think there's like 7. Don't quote me on that though. And this is just like the first part of the story. And it's just like, it's basically a book has been chopped into 7 parts. And so like there's no full story in the first part. Let me tell you what it's about. It's speculative fiction in the true sense of that word. Not in the sense that Margaret Atwood uses. Anyways, it speculates what if Genghis Khan had succeeded in conquering the whole world. This book concentrates specifically on Australia, and it's like a wide cast of characters. And I actually really enjoyed getting all the multiple points of views. I mean, I believe there were only like 2 or 3 characters that were actually repeats, but otherwise we got different characters in each chapter, right, from their perspective. But the story still managed to flow very well, despite, you know, constantly jumping from person to person to person. And it was, I think it was more comprehensive as a result of that. We get perspectives from, you know, ordinary people living under Mongol rule, you know, rebels banding together to fight against the Mongols, and then the Mongols themselves. And I really enjoyed that, getting to see both sides, because I didn't know who to root for. Like, logically, I probably think, like, you know, I probably shouldn't be rooting for the Mongols. But he managed to create a lot of sympathy for them, as well as, like, people and as characters, you know. So I really enjoyed that. I was a little concerned about how obsessed the author seems with boobs and butt plugs. They were mentioned a little too frequently than what I like for my taste. It was a little too much. I went so far as to have like a 3-breasted character. Otherwise it was very much set in reality. That wasn't enough to deter me from wanting to read more though. So I guess that's an accomplishment there. We'll see if the boobs have some extra meaning further down the road. Speaking of more sexism, Super Extra Grande by Yoss. So I picked this up because I had previously listened to A Planet for Rent by the same author, and I really enjoyed that. It was really like weird about how Earth was taken over by like universal corporations. Like, when I say universal, I mean like they were out in the universe and they came to Earth and they kind of took it over, like bought Earth. So I thought I'd give this one a go. It was only 4 hours long, and I listened to it all in one day, and about an hour of that was the character going on about how he always had problem with his gorgeous female assistants falling in love with him. And I was just like, you're wasting a quarter of the book talking about this. Like, you could just take that out. And the story would have been a lot shorter. The other 3 hours were quite interesting though, because the story is about a vet for really large extraterrestrial animals. And by large, we mean like the largest animal he treats is the size of a planet. So yeah, that was pretty cool, because Yoss himself had studied biology. So I wish it was more about that and exploring the biological aspects of these other creatures instead of, you know, talking about how women always fall for this guy who's really ugly. And I then read A Thinking Person's Guide to Islam by Ghazi bin Muhammad. He's a Prince of Jordan, actually. So I realized I only kind of knew like the basics of Islam, and I wanted to learn a bit more about this religion. So I stumbled upon this book in the library and thought, great opportunity, let's take it. So the main things I took away from this is that the Quran is meant to be read aloud, and is written in such a way as to be pleasing to the ears. I thought that was really neat. And while I knew that Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all kind of shared parts of what Christians call the Old Testament, I didn't know that Muslims actually trace their origins specifically to Hagar, who's one of my favorite women in the Old Testament. She was the concubine of Abraham, mother of Ishmael. So if you're familiar with that story, she's the one who says, God has seen me. Yeah. So I want to share a quote from this book. By knowing others, we know ourselves better. As we have seen, by knowing ourselves better, we come to know God better. So I thought that was interesting, that we have to get to know other people, get to know different perspectives, different cultures, different beliefs, and we get to know ourselves better through that process. And as we know ourselves better, we can know God better. And wisdom and knowledge are highly praised in the Quran, and that was also nice to see. My one criticism of this book is the author started pitting down other religions to show how great Islam was. And he didn't need to do that. That wasn't necessary. It kind of put a bad taste in my mouth, and I had my backup reading for the rest of that, the rest of the book, because, you know, from what I know about Islam before this book is that they are, you know, super respectful of other people's religions. And to see that in this book made me kind of look at it differently. You know, if the author believes this, and I know that it's wrong, because I, in my own faith, don't think that's right, then is what else he's saying in the book is wrong as well. So it kind of shifted my perspective from, oh, this is interesting to learn, to like, is he telling me the full truth? Or is he coming at this from this flawed perspective? So I can no longer trust what he was writing. So that kind of, you know, got my hackles up a little. And then I read The Gospel of Breaking by Gillian Christmas, and this isn't about religion, despite the gospel being in the title. I do have 2 other books about religion to talk about later though, so I'm reading a lot about religion. This is actually a series of poems, as with any collection. Some were good, some I didn't personally connect with, and some were funny. She had one about feeling accomplished after she posted to Facebook, only to have her friend pointed out that she spelled something wrong, and I was just like, yes, that's so relatable, that's so funny. And I actually really connected with some of the ones that she wrote about her mom as well. I didn't really connect with the ones that she wrote about relationships, but you know, that's gonna happen in any collection, right? So I'm just gonna share a quote from one of the poems. I could read out like 2 or 3 of them, the whole poem, but I'm just gonna read this small snippet here. But Mama, if it's true that we can create in each other new and old and buried memories, then I will plant you nothing but mango trees and warm island breezes, and your daughter's face looking up at you with all the love and life you have given me. I just thought that was really well said. Another audiobook I listened to is called How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Negamatsu. And I honestly didn't think I'd enjoy a book about a pandemic while experiencing a pandemic, but this one was just right. You know, whether it was having to do with like a more fantastical type of illness, or the concentration on people as opposed to the disease, or just the fact that I was ready for it, you know, it was actually a real hit with me. It just didn't quite make it into the top 3. But this would be the 4th. This is the honorary mention. So these are a series of interconnected short stories that all take place in the same universe. And it's mostly the same universe. There is a story about a ship leaving our universe. But you know, I think you understand what I mean. The same thing's happening to everyone through these short stories. They each concentrate on one person's experience with the pandemic. So from someone working at an amusement park that euthanizes children with the disease, because the disease hits children first, to a person working in like a forensics lab falling in love with a person who's decided to donate their body, to science, to a pig who was used in experiments suddenly developing human speech and learning about their role in the world. And he was so good at creating sympathy for all these characters and making them feel like real people. You know, each story actually showed the progression of the timeline. So we start at the very beginning of the pandemic, explore that through one person, and, you know, continuing on. So the story progresses in the timeline, but with different stories in each section. And there were characters from other stories making cameos in the later stories, so it was really interesting. And it was just it was touching. I don't know if you know the word like comfy in relation to like consuming media, but this book was comfy. And I'm definitely going to remember this book fondly. Okay, my top three. Two are actually nonfiction. So, number 3, See No Stranger by Valerie Carr. This book is about changing the world through love. And that seems kind of, you know, saccharine and silly, but it's not. It's through loving others, loving your opponents, and loving yourself. She ties her philosophy with her own personal experience as well. And the subtitle of this book is fitting in calling it both a manifesto and a memoir. And it finally gave me the answer to the question that someone asked me way back in high school. We were talking about social justice, and he asked me, you know, what can you actually do about all of this? And the answer Valerie Carr gave is just be there. You know, show others that you care and that you love them. We can't all be big heroes going out saving the day, but by just showing up at a memorial or listening to someone, that can be enough to make a difference. I think this quote also helped. Breathe, think, then choose your sword and shield. You don't have to know the answers. You just have to be ready for the moment when the world says now. I really like that. An unexpected bonus of this book is Carr talking about her own Sikh faith. So I'm glad I got to learn about that as well. And she even provided some shabads, which are verses in the Sikh faith that are meant to be sung aloud. So I didn't go out seeking information about this religion, but I'm glad that I did learn about it. It was a religion I wanted to learn more about too, so it was pretty cool to come across that accidentally. And I don't really know if I can do this book justice by just talking about it in such a short time period, and I do plan on doing a more in-depth video about it, but I highly recommend it to anybody interested in social justice and world issues and learning more about what you can do about it. And there's actual trigger warnings for this book, sexual assault and racist violence, just FYI. Coming at number 2 is Sorrowland by River Solomon. So this book started out as one thing and ended up as a whole other thing, and it was amazing and thrilling the whole way through. So I think it's best to go into this book not knowing a whole lot about the plot and letting the story unveil itself at its own pace. So the basic premise that you should know going in is basically that it's a girl running away from a cult. That's kind of where the story starts. And this is what science fiction is meant to be. This is it. It's meant to take current real world problems and extrapolate them to extremes so that readers are confronted with them and what could possibly happen if we don't do something about them now. So I really enjoyed the writing in this as well. The beauty of the writing in contrast to the dark and disturbing topics that were discussed. I think it's best described by a quote, so I'm going to read that out here. There is more to life than Caneland, more to earth and its collected sorrows. There is wonder and awe and the allure of nothingness. No one had figured everything out, but there were people who made their home in the searching. If they could dwell there, so could Vern. I really like that. The writing and the pacing were spot on for my tastes. Aside from one chapter that kind of switched perspectives that threw me off for a bit, and I thought maybe if she had continued adding that perspective in, it would be different, but it was just like a one-off. So it was kind of weird. But overall, despite that one chapter, it was a fantastic book, and I definitely need to pick more up by Solomon. Just so looking forward to reading more of what they have to write. The number one book, without question, I knew this would be number one, is Inspired by Rachel Held Evans. And this book is about looking at the Bible through different literary genres found throughout it. But it's not like a dreary kind of academic text, like this book is this literary genre. You know, that's kind of what my description makes it sound like, but it's not like that. It's actually very, very readable. She begins each chapter with a story that expands upon a story inspired by the Bible, so in some way. And then in the chapter where she then goes into like the nonfiction aspect, she includes her own personal experience deconstructing her faith from evangelicalism and fundamentalism, which I already talked about, that I really like that she's looking at it more critically. She started asking questions, and when she wasn't getting the answers or was told like, don't ask questions, she kept digging deeper. And she didn't lose her faith. She deconstructed it, and it evolved into something else. So she comes from the basis that just because the Bible isn't factual doesn't mean it isn't true, that fictional stories can have meaning in our lives. The way she combined theology with, you know, personal reflection was very informative. It made it much easier to remember stuff instead of just getting theology thrown at you. And I read this in conjunction with the Portable Seminary, and they both talked about the doctrine of Scripture. That was the topic of the Portable Seminary. And while the seminary was very fundamentalist, and I said it already, it talked in circles. I guess I should explain here that the Portable Seminary and fundamentalist evangelicalism, they believe that the Bible is 100% true and factual. So, like, they believe in creationism. They believe that, you know, the things that happened in the Bible happened in history. So I just want to clarify that point. Evans was much more comprehensive and understandable. She was much more thorough in her explanations of things, and it helped that I already agreed, of course, with a lot of her same beliefs, but it helped me gain a deeper understanding of them. And she also helped me further come to grips with the letters of Paul. I've talked about this before, that I do have a lot of issues with Paul, but instead of just, you know, taking the King James Version at face value, you know, she placed them in context, and even she just straight up said that we have to untangle culturally conditioned assumptions from universal truths. So just because Paul said it, you know, 2,000 years ago, we don't have to take it as gospel, pun intended. So yeah, that was, you know, very interesting, that because there was a lot of good stuff in the letters of Paul. I'm not going to get into a rant about religion, but yes. So that's it. Those are the 15 books I read in March. I'm more than halfway towards my goal of 50 books. I'm definitely gonna meet that goal much sooner than I intended, but I am spending a lot of time with certain books, so I think the goal is still there. It's just not as expansive as I had initially planned on it. I'm just looking at my cats. So yeah, let me know what your top 3 books were from March, and the worst book that you read in March. We don't talk a lot about the worst books. Thank you for watching.